How far did you think you were going to go? How far did you think you could go at that level back then?
At that point, I really thought I would be the CEO of that company someday. We had a nanny for our kids, a wonderful lady who was our nanny. Our kids were all in private schools. We had built and designed our own home. I mean, it was getting really nice. Nice cars, amazing vacations.
So
Wow.
what wasn't to like about that?
Well, I was liking it a whole lot. I'm not going to lie to you. But there also was this deep sense of sadness within me that I would just sort of kick down. And it would, now I realize it was coming out in terms of my very sarcastic and cynical wit. What I realize now is that sarcasm, that cynicism was actually hiding a very deep sadness.
Sadness about what?
At that point, I didn't even want to go there.
I'm Dick Gordon. You're listening to The Story. Daneen Warner stayed with the industry through the 80s and into the 90s. She watched as health care costs went up and the value of pharmaceutical stocks went up. And even then, Daneen says, she saw cases of where even her own companies were rushing drugs to market before they'd been thoroughly tested. It was a turning point for her when she found herself speaking out.
It was almost like a burp.
Unbidden, was it?
Yes, it was almost as if my soul or my deeper sense, I'd been stifling the sadness for so long. It just came out one day.
In a meeting with the other execs?
Yeah.
What did you say?
I just said, I think we have more work to do. I think we need to do more work. And see, usually when you go into that meeting, those kind of meetings, everything has already been determined. This is almost like a rubber stamp. So you don't go into those meetings and say things like that because the team has already spoken.
So what happened?
My boss was really angry with me.
In the meeting?
No. Oh, no. It was handled with professional courtesy in that meeting. You always do that. No, out in the hall. He was very, whatever do you think you were doing in there?
Is that what he said?
Mm-hmm. What the blah, blah, blah do you think you were doing in there? Blah, blah, blah.
And your answer was?
I just felt I needed to tell the truth on the situation as I see it. Well, there's really no room for that.
Was there ever room for that? Because in many ways what you're talking about, Daneen, is that kind of, corporate morality that we're looking at in the financial industry right now. And I've talked to people who were bank presidents 30 years ago who say, and I have no way of checking it, but they say, it's not the way we did things. Right. You were in the pharmaceutical industry. Did you see this kind of drive to profit change while you were there, or was that always a part of the work that you did?
Well, in all truthfulness, there was a point in my career where I was low enough for the organization. It might have been there, but I wasn't responsible for paying attention to it.
But by the time you got to the
yes.
corporate meeting room.
Yes. It was always very, what can we get away with without being noticed? And of course, if you did get caught, then they pull back and they'll sacrifice you to the marketplace or to whatever.
So we go back to this encounter that you're having with your boss in the hallway, and he's saying, what the blank, blank, blank were you doing in the meeting? And you've said, I think that's, it's something that needed to be said. Was that the beginning of the end of your career there, or were you going to be allowed a couple of those before you started to draw attention as a troublemaker?
Well, I began to, I felt this deep sense of peace, and I began to be more truthful, and that did not make me popular. It was pretty much the beginning of the end.
Daneen Warner switched her focus. She began to work on ways to make people healthier, to keep health care costs down. She found a project that focused on diabetes.
I was ecstatic. It's like, oh my gosh, I think I finally found my niche.
Right.
I finally found my niche. And the people were wonderful. I had some great nurses. I had my little office, and we were able to work with the family practice guys who got to trust my nurses, and we were working with their patients. So when those patients weren't in front of the physicians, my nurses were working on the phones with their patients to make sure that their patients understood what they needed to do.
So were you figuring out, though, a better way of offering care to diabetics without big bills?
Yes. Actually, in 2 years, we met all, and in some cases exceeded, the quality of life indicators we had set for our program. And we did so for 20% less money than the baseline year. And we're actually named the Diabetes Program of the Year by the state of Delaware.
So what became of this?
It was discontinued.
And what did they say? What was the explanation?
Well, just that they weren't going to continue with it. I mean, that's what was being said. And I was told then to lay off all my people, and they brought a guy in to basically destroy all the data on the server. And I remember sitting in a chair while he was doing what he had to do and crying. And then they laid me off.
And what was going on? What was really going on? What weren't they saying?
Well, there were many people, once again, getting back to the point about how we pay for health care in this country. When you start cutting inpatient days, ER visits, amputation rates in a prevalent disease, you have stakeholders, providers who look at that and say, whoa, we don't...
Surgeons, drug companies, all the hospitals.
Right.
And you're saying that the hospitals and the drug companies and the surgeons and these stakeholders were saying we don't really want a better, cheaper approach to diabetes? I mean...
All I can tell you is this. I don't know who said what. That's the medical politics of this country. What I can tell you is a couple of family practice guys said, I want you to know this is what's going on. You've made a lot of people nervous because all of a sudden, if this is rolled out, there's going to be people that are going to make less money.
I'm Dick Gordon. You're listening to The Story. Daneen Warner found herself doing some serious soul-searching after that. She'd had a similar project on asthma end in much the same way. When the industry discovered that it wasn't a path to profit, then it wasn't a path that was pursued. What Daneen came to realize was that this pharmaceutical world was no longer a place for her. She's a hiker. She found herself one day on a mountain asking God to send her in a new direction, and after that, she went to divinity school. I asked Daneen if she feels that the healthcare business let her down.
I think I really wanted to believe, going into it, as altruistic as I was, that I could do good things for others, but then I got swept up in the reality of that world.
But that was in part your own greed, right? Your own desire to be a part of that world.
Yes. I didn't say no to it.
Yeah. So when you look back now, from the perspective that you have now, are you in any way encouraged by what we're seeing now with all the public outrage over the excessive bonuses and questions being raised about who was doing what and whose interest were they were? Are you encouraged to think that maybe coming out the other end of this, there'll be a larger consideration of some of those ethics that you think were lacking?
I'm hoping the answer is yes. I want to believe the answer is yes. Would I'd like to believe that this isn't just sort of a blip in history, that once we get back on sure footings again, we're going to slide back into the deceptive, manipulative practices of greed. Because I have to admit, when you realize your competitors are going to get ahead of you by doing deceitful, unethical practices that they get away with, how do you go to the investment community and say, geez, my earnings per share this year are going to be lower? When are they going to say, it's okay, Daneen, that you have a lower earnings per share because we like the way you do business, so we will not sell?